Hey guys, Dylan from the Geek Duo here, and today we have reached about the midpoint of the RWBY Volume 8 hiatus. So I thought, what better time than to bring forth my predictions for the second half of the volume. Now, I know that we got a sneak peek of Volume 8 Chapter 8 around about Christmas time, but I wasn't going to react to just a 30-odd second clip, and by the time I'd started writing this out and thought to maybe put my reaction to it in this video, I had already watched the clip, so I wasn't going to re-react to it. However, I am going to talk about what we saw in that clip. It started out with RWBY having a little bit of a breakdown over everything that has been happening the past few days. Now, when I say that she's finally having a breakdown, I don't mean that I wanted her to have a breakdown, because that's just mean. I just saying it was bound to happen sooner or later, provided that they're intending to create realistic characters. And a child of her age would realistically be having a mental breakdown in this situation. The next interesting point that I found in this scene was that it took all four of the kids, that being RWBY, Weiss, Blake, and Whitley, to bring Penny to Weiss's room, as they all have her blood on their clothes, that green liquid that we saw surrounding her in the crater, and there's also no sign of May throughout this entire scene, so it's unknown as to whether she has taken off to the crater yet. Though I think that she will have, because otherwise the heroes would still have direct access to an airship, which means that in the event of, say, the Hound arriving at Schnee Manor, they could easily just hop in the airship and fly away, and that wouldn't be compelling in the plot sense, I guess. And I also think this because when the clip starts, there's the sound of an earpiece cutting out. So that might have been May telling the kids that she's flown to the crater. The final thing that we learn from this scene is that power within the Schnee Manor is not functioning, either because of the storm, because power has been cut off all across Atlas from the invasion, or from external sabotage, which I think is the most likely. And we will see Willow make her first appearance of the volume, and she says that there's a generator somewhere on the Schnee Manor that they need to try and use to restore power. Now, my first prediction for the second half of Volume 8 is one that, if you've watched any of my RWBY Volume 8 content, you can probably guess it, and that is the Siege on Schnee Manor. The Siege on Schnee Manor. Showdown at the Schnee Manor. Siege on the Schnee Manor. Anyway, this is the prediction that I think is going to happen first, as it will likely happen, or at least start to happen, in Chapter 8. Okay, so the scene starts with the four kids bringing Penny up to Weiss's room, and as they get her on the mattress, RWBY gets a call from May saying something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, but I'm heading to the crater. They need me down there, and your friends need you up there. So I'm heading off without you. We then obviously get the sneak peek scene, followed by the kids deciding who should go down to activate the generator, which will probably happen during a cut to Mantle or Atlas team, or maybe the villains. And I believe that the combination that they will choose is Ruby and Willow to go activate the generator, while the other kids help Klein get medical supplies inside. I reckon that it will be Willow and Ruby, because it wouldn't be Willow and Wise, because then there'd be no one inside the manor that knows their way around it that would be able to get the supplies needed for Klein, other than Whitley, and he wouldn't be able to get them fast enough as if there were two people who knew the layout. They also wouldn't do Willow and Blake because of the bad blood between the Schnee family and the Faunus. Well, we don't know whether Willow holds that viewpoint. It's best not to risk it. And I don't reckon it'll be Willow and Whitley for the same reason I said that it wouldn't be Willow and Wise. So that just leaves Ruby and Willow. I also think that it's going to be Willow, because as they're getting the generator activated, that's when the Hound is going to finally arrive to track down Penny, smelling her blood on Ruby. And this is when Willow will bring out the Schnee version of Drunk Foo, while Ruby runs in to warn the others. Now when I say Drunk Foo, I'm obviously talking about that Iron Fist scene, and definitely not the Jackie Chan Drunken Master fight. In all honesty though, I am actually talking about the Iron Fist scene for reasons that will become apparent soon. Anyway, Ruby, Weiss and Blake rush out to see Willow putting up a incredible fight against the Hound, but also slowly losing ground towards the manor. And Blake tells Weiss that they need to get Penny and Nora out of the manor, saying that they'll come back once they get the two incapacitated friends a safe distance away. Ruby speeds back into the house to tell the others that they need to go, and we see Klein come out carrying Penny, while Ruby is helping Whitley with Nora. As they exit the building, Blake and Weiss see the Hound launch itself up to Weiss's window and start sniffing around before being pulled back down by Willow. They realize that it's looking for one of them and hear it grunt out Maiden, so they decide to split up, with Ruby, Blake and Klein taking Penny one way, and Weiss and Whitley taking Nora the other way. They figured that have the most trained huntsman protecting the one that the Hound is hunting for, and obviously have the person that's able to carry that person in that same group, whereas Weiss and Whitley, they can take Nora, who isn't in as much danger, so they don't need as much guarding. We then follow Weiss's group, moving as fast as they can through the streets of Atlas, when there's a sudden explosion that comes from behind them, and as they turn around, they see smoke rising from where the Schnee Manor used to be. Weiss summons her Armagigas and commands it to scoop up Whitley and Nora before turning around and running back towards the manor. But before she gets to the end of the street, the Hound launches itself over a nearby roof. It decided to follow them because the Hound is an incredibly smart creature, and it smelt Penny's scent on 6 different people, that being Ruby, Weiss, Whitley, Blake, Klein, and Penny herself. And it figured, which makes more sense logically, that the group would split up and keep the intended target with the largest cluster of similar scents, or they would use that stronger scent to lead it in the opposite direction to where they're taking the actual one. Now, this isn't actually what the heroes were intending to happen, so the hound, using logic, was in the wrong. Weiss tries to distract it by engaging it in battle and to get revenge for her mother, so Whitley calls upon the only person he can think of, this being Winter. We then cut to the Aesops as Winter answers the call, annoyed that her brother is calling her at a time like this, but her face drops when she hears him panicking and telling her about Willow, and about how the hound is now attacking him and Weiss as well. Winter demands he tell her where they are, and he does so before the call cuts out. Winter is now faced with a dilemma: follow the orders of Ironwood or save her siblings. Luckily, she doesn't have to decide, as Marrow starts bringing the ship into the air, and before anyone can ask what he thinks he's doing, they get a call from James, informing them that the bomb is on the way. Winter tells him that he'll need to get another team to drop the payload off, as she needs to go save her siblings. But James tells her that if they leave their post, then they will be seen in the same way that Team RWBY is, as traitors and fugitives. Winter tells him that that's a price she's willing to pay, taking the second pilot seat and flying towards Weiss and Whitley, without giving the other Aesops a chance to say their part. The next part is less in depth, but I think that Weiss will get incapacitated in her fight within the Hound, knocked unconscious and all that, but for some reason, her summon doesn't dissipate. Instead, it begins responding to Whitley, because due to all the stress that he's been going through these past few days, that if the Hound is there, then his mother obviously didn't make it out of the fight, and the fear of losing Weiss has caused his semblance to activate. And because of how powerful of an awakening he undergoes, his semblance is, at its base, more powerful than Weiss and Winter's, giving him an ability to not only access the same glyphs and summon abilities that they have under training, but also the ability to command the summons of the other siblings, and, in cases of distress, make them stronger, at the cost of having to use all his concentration, meaning that he can't move while he's controlling and buffing these summons. So it's sort of a mix of the Schnee family and Jean's aura amplification, though it stops Whitley from being able to do anything other than just stand there. Anyway, the Armagigas sets him on the ground and engages the Hound long enough for the airship to arrive, with Vine using his tendrils to scoop up Weiss and Nora, while Elm and Winter jump out to assist Whitley. Weiss wakes up, wondering how her summoning is still standing, but before she can question anything, the Hound decides that the battle isn't in its favour anymore, so it flees in the general direction of RWBY's group. Whitley collapses to his knees from exertion, causing the Armagigas to finally dissolve, alerting Weiss and Winter to the fact that he was the one that was using his semblance to summon it. But Marrow interrupts their realization by commenting on the fact that that must have been the Grim that Yang and Jean were talking about, that took Oscar. They all load up on the ship, and the Schnees all briefly console each other before Weiss tells them that they need to save the rest of their group. They fly over the ruins of the Schnee Manor, following the Hound as it bounds from rooftop to rooftop, and maybe there's a scene showing a blood puddle or some indication of Willow's corpse that the siblings see. And they manage to swoop down in front of Ruby's group just before the Hound jumps down to attack them. And this time it's Harriet and Marrow that jump out to defend the kids while they jump on the ship, with Marrow trying to use his semblance on the Hound, but the Hound somehow avoiding it, maybe because part of a stretched out limb was in the wrong direction when Marrow activates it. They then fly back to Monstra, hoping to intercept the bomb so that Mantle Team can make it out, but they find out that it's too late as Monstra explodes just as they're piling out of the airship. This is where I'm going to stop the focus on these two groups, as I'll circle back to this in a little bit. Okay, so far we've covered the siege on Schnee Manor, the Aesops defecting from Ironwood, the death of Willow, Whitley's semblance awakening, and Amity Team meeting the Hound. So before we get to my next big prediction spiel, I have a few rapid fire smaller predictions that I've thought of. I'm predicting a badass fight down in the crater that shows off all of the happy huntresses and some of the able-bodied citizens, that they're fighting against a grim horde of their own, where we get to see each of the happy huntresses' unique fighting styles, as well as Joanna's hinted battle prowess, which was hinted when Robin said that she didn't think Joanna had lost a fair fight before her one against Robin, and Joanna's semblance. I'm also predicting that the Grimm will make their way into the Atlas subway in a sort of Mountain Glen situation where they get trapped in the subways with a bunch of Grimm. Specifically, I'm choosing the Apathy, which are known for seeking out underground locations, and the Sentinels, which have easy access to underground locations. And I reckon they're going to corner the civilians of Atlas between the two exits. This will cause the Huntsman students to have to form an army of sorts in order to protect the civilians, showing off some of the students we've already seen, such as Team Funky, Ciel, maybe some of the background tournament students, as well as some new students that haven't been shown, just to flesh out the battle a bit more. I also hope to see some recognizable Elysian citizens, such as the Marigolds, that insensitive lady from the fundraiser, maybe a couple cameos from Cinder's backstory, and more. The final part of this quickfire section is the near guarantee that there will be civilian casualties on both battles, but I'm also predicting at least one named character to die on each of these fronts. I'm thinking that it'll be either Ciel or one of Team Funky in the subway, and I reckon it'll be Joanna down in the crater. Not because I don't like Joanna, but because she's the happy huntress that we have seen the least of. And usually, when there's a group of warriors and one of them isn't explored as much as the others, it's because they're being saved for a massive showcase. So, what bigger showcase could be maybe a double-edged semblance that saves the majority of the people in the crater, but also takes her out as well. Okay, on to the next big prediction, and that is that the prison break will happen early in the second half, in the first episode or two, maybe 3 if we're stretching it. And this will be Cinder and Neo breaking into the Atlas prison to free Watts. And this is how Ironwood, Robin and Crow are going to enter the front lines. The way I see this going down is Cinder breaking Watts out, Watts waiting until he's safely away before deactivating Robin and Crow's cells, Crow immediately trying to rush off to find Ironwood, which is what Watts was hoping for, Robin managing to catch up to him and stop him enough to talk some sense into him, saying, "There's a war happening outside. This can wait until after we do our jobs as huntsmen." Because I'm fairly certain they'd know about Salem's arrival, considering they were brought in for questioning well after she had arrived. Watts is watching this on one of the security cameras and, upon seeing that his plan has failed, sets off the alarms and sends that specific security feed to James's terminal, who now is aware that Crow and Robin are out of their cells and where exactly they are. So he decides to follow them. He catches up to them as they reach a crossroads between prisoner storage and the hangar, and asks them what exactly they think they're doing, and brings back the line, "Do you intend to fight me?" Crow replies, saying something along the lines of, "Were it not for the war going on outside, I'd have already killed you." He clips Clover's pin onto his lapel and looks at the ground. "It's your fault he died. You know that, right? He was so scared of disobeying you, they all are, that he wouldn't even wait until we'd delivered Tyrion before trying to arrest me." "What do you mean they're afraid of me? They respect me. They see me as someone who can lead this country. They see you as someone who will put a bullet in their head the moment they disagree with you." "That's not true. You told me yourself that you'd have put a bullet in me if I'd worked for you. Clover was so scared of disobeying you that, when faced with a decision between following an order or helping me arrest a deranged serial killer, who only escaped because your order came through, he chose to continue fighting me. And look where that got him." This is the part where the grasp of James's semblance begins to loosen its hold on him, at least a little, and he finally sees the pain he's put his friends through. He tentatively reaches a hand out towards Crow, who just slaps it away before shoulder checking James and turning the corner towards prisoner storage. He grabs their weapons and then walks to the hangar, tossing Robin hers as he passes. The last thing he says before entering the hangar is, "Go back to your office, General. Let your pawns fight this war for you, just like she does." And I'd love if something along these lines does actually come up in the show, because for one, James says that only my friends call me James. To you, it's General when talking to Oscar. So for Crow to just call him General, not James, not Jimmy, not even Ironwood, he is admitting that you fucked up. I am not your friend anymore. And also, James's biggest fear is turning out like Salem or Salem winning. So for Crow to directly compare what James is doing with his soldiers and that, and not fighting on his own, with what Salem's doing, letting her Grim and Lieutenants fight without fighting on her own, would be a great wake-up call as well. Okay, so we've now covered my major predictions for 3 of the 5 main groups, that being Amity Team, Atlas Team, and the Prison Team, while leaving Mantle Team and the Villain Team. So let's take a look at those latter two now, shall we? The last we saw of Mantle Team was them heading from the Aesop's airship on their way to enter the Grim Whale. Now, obviously, they'll have to fight some of the Grim hordes attacking the front lines on their way inside. But this leads us to the first problem they'll have to face. How exactly will they get into the whale? Now, they can attempt to head in through the front door, which is the whale's mouth, but that means they'll have to fight each new wave of Grim, wade through the existing lake of liquid Grim, and avoid the continuous waves of Grim that keep flooding out. The obvious problems with this approach is that 1. It'll take too long to fight all those enemies. 2. They can't actually touch the liquid Grim without it damaging them. And 3. They'd be in Salem's direct line of sight throughout the entire approach. So there goes any hopes at a surprise attack. Now, one of these problems, that being the Grim, can be solved by Ren's semblance, assuming he can still mask people's emotions. And there is also the slimmest chance that this could work on Salem as well, given her Grim physiology, but I personally have never latched onto that theory, so I just wanted to make a quick mention of it. They could also avoid the Grim liquid by skirting around the edges of the existing pool, which should keep them away from any new waves as well. But they still can't actually enter through the whale's mouth because it's full of this liquid Grim. So they'll have to find another way in. Coincidentally, there is another way in, and that being the RWBY docks. But from the looks of them in Chapter 7, they're still hanging off the side of Atlas. So Mantle Team would have to cross the battlefield, as they landed on the right side of the troops, that being this side, and the docks were shown on the right side of the whale, which is this side. And they'd have to launch themselves off Atlas to land on one of these air pads, which is possible. Yang can use Ember Solica to shoot herself across. Ren can either grapple there with Stormflower or be propelled off of John's shield like he was in when they were chasing the Hound, and John can use his shield to launch himself over like he did off of the Sentinel in that same chase. So I believe that this is the most likely way that they'll enter the whale. And it's also here that they'll meet their first villain. The theory that Mantle Team will meet up almost instantly with Emerald, if they were to enter the RWBY docks, is the one that has the most credibility based off of in-universe events. Because here's the timeline of events that we know have happened to both teams so far. Starts with Mantle Team meeting up with Atlas Team by the river. The Grim River kills the highlight shields for Atlas. Monster starts her ascent up to Atlas. Mantle Team gets arrested and start their ascent to Atlas. Monster lands and releases her first wave. The villains leave the throne room. Hazel and Oscar heading back to the torture room. Mercury and Tyrion head to their rooms to pack their things. Cinder leaving with the Hound, and I'm going to say Neo, to invade Atlas. And Emerald stays behind to watch Salem. Atlas gets its military lined up outside the walls. Salem begins the attack on the army while releasing more Grimm. Mantle Team reach Atlas and see the carnage. James informs Atlas Team about the bomb. Emerald goes to the torture room to eavesdrop on the conversation. Oscar retells the lost fable. Emerald heads back to Mercury's room and then tells him about the lost fable. Mantle Team manages to convince Atlas Team to let them enter the whale. Mercury, Emerald, and Tyrion head to the docks and the airship takes off. This means that Mantle Team would likely have the entirety of Emerald telling Mercury what's up and the walk to the docks as their time to fight their way through the Grimm and get in a position that they can see that, hey, there's an airship taking off from the right side of the whale. Let's go investigate. Anyway, back to the predicting. I also think that when they land on the docks, Emerald will have been standing there stunned, still trying to figure out what she has to do, and both parties will notice each other at the same time and get into defensive stances. Ren tells the others to wait, but Yang ignores this and launches forward to attack, followed closely by Jean, who misinterpreted Ren's wait as him being concerned about Emerald's semblance, so he reassures Ren that she can only affect one of them, remember? And the fighting begins. We then cut to Ren standing there and watching both Jean and Yang fight the air. And he just walks over to Emerald, explaining to her that he can see the conflict she's feeling right now about not wanting to be a part of that anymore, and that they don't need to fight. They're just here to get Oscar and the relic and maybe help her get out of there before the place explodes. Emerald agrees to take them to Oscar before dropping her illusion and quickly walking into the whale, leaving a very confused Jean and Yang, who get even more confused when Ren indicates for them to follow her. She leads them to the room where Oscar is being held and opens the door to reveal it empty. She thinks out loud that Hazel must have taken Oscar to Salem to tell her the lamp's name, and the 4 kids need to get to the lamp before she does. So they all take off running towards wherever it's being held. As they're heading there, Emerald tells them that once they're in the room, they'll need to hide until Salem and Hazel arrive. Then she'll use her illusions to hide them from the adults while they grab Oscar, the lamp, and escape. They reach the room and run inside, only to come to an abrupt halt when they slam into Hazel's back. Hazel, lamp in hand, turns around to see who ran into him, and this reveals to the kids Oscar behind him. And when he sees Mantle Team, he tentatively reaches a hand down towards his dust pouch, but Oscar just calls out Jin's name. As time freezes around them, Jean asks Oscar what he's doing, but Oscar tells him to trust him before turning to Hazel, telling him to go ahead and ask his question. Now, there are a variety of questions that Hazel could ask, such as who's really to blame for Gretchen's death, what's Salem's true goal, should I trust Ozpin, etc., etc. And I honestly don't know which direction they choose for this scenario, so I'm going to skip over the Jinn lore, but when they all come back from her realm, it's confirmed that Hazel and Emerald aren't on Salem's side anymore. I'd also love it if they could slip in a scene confirming to Emerald that Cinder doesn't love her, such as Hazel asking the question, who should we trust? And it revealing to Hazel that he should trust Ozpin and shouldn't trust Salem. It revealing to Emerald that she shouldn't trust Salem or Cinder. It revealing to Mantle Team and Oscar that they should trust Ozpin, they should trust Ironwood, and something along those lines. But I can also see this being a major conflict point in the future, where Emerald and Cinder have to face each other on opposite sides, and Cinder revealing in the heat of battle that she never cared for Emerald. I can then see a quick scene of the villains and heroes discussing what they need to do next, but they're interrupted by Winter's voice coming over their earpiece, informing them that the bomb has arrived. They all rush out of the room, heading towards the docks, but at this point, Salem is well aware of their presence, so they run straight into a ton of Grimm along their way. Between the 6 of them, they're able to defeat any and all creatures that have been thrown at them, though Emerald, Ren and Jean do struggle against the Berengals, much like how RWBY struggled against it in the Volume 4 trailer. But eventually, they make it to the hallway leading towards the docks, and as they round the corner, they come face to face with Salem herself. Salem was, of course, waiting for them, so as they round the corner, they activate her trap card, causing those Grimm hands that she used on Hazel in Volume 6 to sprout from the walls and the floor of the hallway. And they grab a hold of everyone except for Emerald, who was able to quickly set her semblance off and move Salem's perception of her to the side, so that the hands grabbed there and not actually Emerald. She sets to freeing the others while Salem is monologuing, but only manages to free a couple, specifically Jean and Oscar, and all but Yang's right arm, before a Berengal comes up and grabs her from behind. Emerald is brought forward and Salem charges up the magic beam that she used on Oscar, but Jean tosses a couple hard-like grenades between them, halting the beam enough for them to free Hazel, who takes the Berengal out with a dust-powered punch, grabs a hold of Emerald as she's falling, and then quickly turns around to take the brunt of the magic beam to his back while shielding the others. Yang and Ren have been freed by this point, and Yang tries to run in front of the beam to get a quick power-up from her semblance and to lessen the strain on Hazel, such as taking the proverbial sky from Atlas, if you will. But Oscar grabs her arm and says, "Miss Xiaolong, your semblance and aura won't work against her magic." Yang realizes that it's Ozpin speaking and says, "You're back? After all this time?" "Yes, but now is not the time for this conversation. I need you to throw me as hard as you can towards Salem." "What?" "My magic. It's the only thing that can withstand hers, and you're the only one strong enough to throw me with enough force to get me over to her. Other than Hazel, but he's a little preoccupied at the moment." Yang grabs Oscar by an arm and leg and tosses him towards Salem, sort of hammer throw style, I guess. And Oscar activates the hexagonal shield to block the beam from hitting Hazel, so as he's passing into it, the beam hits the shield around him, and he flies towards Salem. He lands about halfway between Salem and Hazel, and uses the longest memory to fire a beam of his own magic back at her, as we see in The Lost Fable that he much prefers using a conduit for his magic, whereas Salem uses her own hands. But even this isn't enough to stop him from being pushed back by the force of Salem's blast. Suddenly, a portal opens up behind the heroes, and out steps Raven, who is in the midst of an annoyed conversation with Ty about how she has to bring him to their daughter, but they freeze in fear at the sight of Salem. Yang turns to see her parents before yelling for everyone to go through the portal, which they all do, and Hazel grabs the two stunned adults. Except for Oscar, who can't go through at the moment because he's currently the only thing stopping Salem's magic from hitting all of them. He then jumps up so that he's not rooted to the ground anymore, and lets the force of Salem's magic push him backwards, and he flies into Yang, who at that same moment had been aiming her robotic arm to shoot at Salem. The force of Oscar slamming into her, along with her activating a shoot button, causes her to accidentally shoot the whole arm at Salem instead of the bullets. The two of them fly through the portal and slam into the gathered heroes on the other side, sending them sprawling in different directions, and causing Raven to slam her head into something hard, cutting off the portal just before the bomb explodes. Now, for the sake of dramatic tension, Raven is going to be incapacitated for a while after this, stranding this group on the other side of Remnant. The volume ends with the Atlas Amity Team airship, the prison team in Ironwood airship, and the remaining villains, all converging on the front lines just as the bomb detonates inside Monstra. As the whale debris rains down, so too does a familiar item for the heroes, and that is Yang's robotic arm, the sight of which causes Blake to scream while Mara holds her back, which we know Blake is going to scream at one point. It causes Ruby to drop to her knees and activate her silver eyes in despair, vaporizing the falling whale chunks, the Grim Swarm, and incapacitating both Cinder and the Hound. Because we know that when it activates in despair, it's a lot stronger than when she activates it in hope. And it also causes Crow to grab a hold of Ironwood and slam him against the airship, blaming him for the death of his niece. But before anything else can come from that altercation, they all turn to the sound of a puddle bubbling, and they see Salem rising out of a puddle of liquid grim before instantly wiping out a chunk of Atlesian soldiers. The volume fades to black, and the last thing we hear is Salem's laugh. Now, I do actually have a couple smaller predictions. Like, I said that they can't wade through the liquid grim because it would hurt them. This is based off of the fact that when Salem was submerged in the grim pools, it actively tried to kill her, but because she was immortal, it couldn't, so it transformed her. And this means that if someone were to be in the liquid grim waves, then theoretically that would actively try to kill them in the same way. So if they were to wade through Liquid Grim, it would attack their ankles. Maybe even acting like a sort of acid. There is an exception to this, and that's the fact that Liquid Grim did fall on Oscar's face. Now, I'm going to say that that is going to play a part in either this volume or the next volume, because they wouldn't have taken the time to animate a drop of Liquid Grim falling onto Oscar's face if it wasn't important. Maybe it turns Oscar a little bit harsher because it sort of corrupted him a little to, with the essence of Grim, bring forth the more negative aspects of Oscar's personality. But I honestly don't think they would have gone through the effort of animating that if it wasn't going to play a part. The next thing I want to talk about is Pietro and Maria. I honestly have no clue what's going to happen to them, because the last we saw, they were in Amity. They were safe-ish and just slowly drifting down. Now, yes, Pietro is based off of Geppetto, which means that he should at one point allude to the story by going into the whale. But the same can be said about Penny. And the way I see it, unless Penny were to reactivate while they were at the Schnee Manor and have to fight the kids and then flies off towards the whale, I can't see a way of her getting to the whale before it's blown up. And I can't see Amity floating down at the speed it was to actually hit Atlas or the whale. So I have no idea what's going to happen to those two. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this volume or next volume, but I can see major death flags for Ironwood. I reckon that he is going to make a sacrifice play against Salem. I can see death flags for Harriet or maybe Elm, who sacrifices themselves to protect one or all of the Aesops, and it's revealed as they're dying how much they actually cared about them. I can see that if Ozpin doesn't do the hexagonal shield to intercept the beam, Hazel sacrificing himself to get all the kids off of the whale. And yeah, there are a lot of death flags. They're not all going to come up in this. I mean, they could all come up in this volume. We were told this was meant to be worse than volume 3, and what we've had so far is the tame half of the volume. So for it to be worse than volume 3, we would need a beloved character to die. No, we'd need more than 2 beloved characters to die. Or Atlas being completely destroyed. Which, yeah, it could happen. It may be happening in volume 9. But I don't know. I don't know how to make it worse than Volume 3. I am also now realizing, having read through this entire script for this video, just how much it sounds sort of like fan fiction, I guess, whereas it can be construed as this is the way that I would have done the rest of it, and is very unlikely that RWBY will do it this way, but it does also encompass all of my major points for the predictions, that being the death of Willow, the siege on Shinee Manor, Mantle team being separated from Amity team through Raven's portal, and the siege obviously, defections from Salem and the Aesops, the student army, the question being used, the characters making a reappearance, and of course a couple of the deaths that I've mentioned. So I just wanted to give context for these predictions. Anyway, that's about all I have for this video. If you guys want to tell me your predictions for the second half of Volume 8, you want to try and explain why my predictions won't happen, or you have any other ways in which they may be altered or to make them more realistic, comment them down below. I love discussing things with you guys, and with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.